we looked at this from a historical perspective, and we looked at this uh, conceptually as well, going back to even Adam and Hava, and how separation can come in and create, in that separation can create a scenario where division, in essence, that division leads to space, that division leads to one being in one place, one being in the other place. That division and separation leads to, as that saying goes, that dividing and conquering, a conquered people. And so we begin by looking at the concept of even what happened with Adam and Hava, and how Hasatan came in and first planted a seed of doubt, and in that caused a separation between Adam and Hava. And in causing that space, it started with one very, very important tactic that he used, and that was introducing doubt and disobedience. Doubting what the Most High said, and then that being followed by being disobedient to what the Most High said. And we see what ended up happening, that there was then the fall that took place. And so in that, this fall took place, and then we end up with this scenario where now these two who were on one accord and these two who were obedient to the Most High was now separated from the Most High. And it started with disobedience. And so we looked at, even with the children of Israel, as they came and were in the wilderness, that there was this separation of person from person. Remember, there was one point where they made the calf, right? And then Yahweh told them, hey, cause a separation between the obedient and the disobedient. Everybody that was involved in this thing, guess what? Caused them to drink this water. Bellies will swell, thighs will rot. And it will become apparent who was disobedient and who was not. And so in that, you now, again, separation, obedient from disobedient. All right, so then we look at the children of Israel who come, and now that they are one people, right? All of these tribes are together. When they come out of the wilderness, they're all together, right? They go into the promised land as a unit. Even, we had the two tribes and the half tribe of Manasseh who stayed on the other side. But even in that, they all went together into the land to take it and to get rid of those enemies. But then we talked about how there came a point where even Israel were divided, the northern kingdoms from the southern kingdoms. And we talked about how in that division you had a king of the north and a king of the south. And the first thing that happened was disobedience. That's what began to set in. They weren't on one accord because, and this is Jeroboam and Rehoboam, or Yarab and Rahab. So remember, that is the people is at the end of their names. The people. So we know they were all the people, in other words. We know they were all the people. And so Rahab meant people will enlarge. And he was the king of the southern. And he was the son the son of Lord, I can't even read my own handwriting. Shalomo. My handwriting is not that great, y'all. The son of Shalomo. And remember, Yarab was an Ephrathite. He was an Ephrathite, and he was in the north. And that name meant a people will contend. A people will contend. And remember that the northern tribe was being oppressed by the southern tribe, right? And the southern tribe says, hey, you got to do this. You got to pay these taxes. And as a matter of fact, my dad was awfully nice to you. I'm going to really put down the clamps on you because we're going to require more of you. We're going to make you do even more than what he did. You thought he was rough. I'm going to be rougher. And so there was this scenario where he now is pitting one against the other, the north against the south. And the north, who the king, his name means people will contend, he says, I tell you what, we will divide, we will separate from you. And now they're going to have their own holy days. Now they're going to have their own place of worship. Now they're going to have their own observances and whatnot. And it's not in line with what the Most High gave. So disobedience set in. Northern kingdom, southern kingdom, completely divided. A people that were one people. And so then we see everywhere we see where it talks about the northern kingdom, it addresses them as Israel, or it addresses them as Ephraim in some points. It addresses them in that way, separating from the southern kingdom, who is often addressed as Yehudah. And so the southern kingdom existed in the south, as it sounds, and it was 2.5 tribes. It was Yehudah, it was Benjamin, and part of the Levitical tribes. The other 10 and the other half of the Levitical tribe existed in the north. All right? So, one thing we talked about, and I want to go back and make sure we hit on. Again, not to reteach all of these because it's just too much information to go back over every little thing. But there were some promises given, and I want to make sure that we keep those front of mind. So first, let's look at Matthew. Matthew chapter 15, verse 22 through 24. Matthew chapter 15, verse 22 through 24. Says, and see, a woman of Canaan came from those borders and cried out to him, saying, have compassion on me, O master, son of David. My daughter is badly demon possessed. Verse 23, but he did not answer. He did not answer her a word. And his taught ones came and asked him, saying, send her away, because she cries after us. And he answering said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I was not sent except unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. We're in the Brit. We're in the New Testament. Right there, Messiah is saying that he was sent to the lost sheep. So there is a scattering. Now let's look at Romans 11 and 25. Romans 11 and 25. And it says, I do not wish you to be ignorant of this secret, brothers, lest you should be wise in your own estimation, that hardening in part has come over Israel. Hardening in part has come over Israel until the completeness of the nations has come in. Until the completeness of the nations have come in, which is where even the very namesake, that is the namesake of this ministry, the Malo HaGoyim, the fullness or completeness of the nations. And that is quoted directly from Genesis 48:19, when Yaakov is blessing his grandsons to be his sons. He is basically adopting his grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And he speaks this of Ephraim. He speaks this over Ephraim. What's critically important about that? What is it that we should understand? Well, Ephraim was what tribe? Northern or southern? He was of the northern tribes. He was under the rulership of Yeroboam. And so this prophecy was made. And so again, you have to kind of go back and look at some of those teachings to get all of the rest of what's in there. One thing that we looked at was the way that a particular word is used in addressing Israel. In Hosea, it's called Jezreel. Jezreel would probably be a better way to say that, or Yezreel. And it means Yasos. Yasos. So there is actually a scattering that took place. That's what we basically were able to ascertain, that there was a scattering of Israel that took place. And we went through some other scripts that showed us how far the children were scattered, and the fact that there was time involved only for the southern tribe. So the exiling of the children of Israel came in 2 steps. So now I'll go back to this chart. It came in 2 steps. And in the first step, it came with the scattering of the northern kingdom. Because remember what happened with the northern kingdom. And let's see if I can get there. Remember what happened with the northern kingdom, which was that they decided in themselves to keep whatever holy days they wanted to. And so part of the issue was them pulling away from the southern kingdom led to an entire disobedience and an entire rebellion against the Most High. Their problem was with their brother, right? They were tired of getting persecuted. They was tired of getting overtaxed. But instead of dealing with that, what did they do? They started being disobedient to the Most High. So y'all ain't gonna tell me what to do. Turns into, well, since y'all say Shabbat is on this day, we're gonna keep this day. Well, since y'all say that we're supposed to celebrate this way, we're gonna celebrate this way. And it literally says that he did whatever was in his heart. His heart. What's up with our hearts? Deceitful and desperately wicked. Like, this is how he decided what he was going to do and how he was going to lead now these northern tribes and how he led them. And so what we see is Assyrians coming in. So if you look at the top here, this kind of breaks down before they were together being ruled by Shlomo or Solomon. And then it is his son who took over, his son, and this being one of the generals that he appointed was the other. So his son being Rehoboam, and one of his soldiers and one of his captains being Yeroboam. And so eventually we go along this and you see there comes a break right here. Around 722, somewhere in that range of time, around 722 is when the Assyrians took over Israel, the northern kingdoms, and took them into slavery. And they took them into slavery in such a way that they didn't just keep them together and just all at once you all come into captivity, but they actually sold them and scattered them. And as they sold and scattered them, they completely lost their identity. They completely lost their culture. We recognize that. We recognize that because we can't very readily go back in our history and know, oh, well, this is who I came from, and this is who, back in Africa, when they took us off and put us on the slave ship, this is, my ancestors was living in this place before they ever made it to the ship. We can't do that. And so we see it's a very similar type scenario, what happened with the northern kingdom. And so that is that first big break. And that was around the time Hosea was prophesying. We read a couple chapters in Hosea. And remember, we even talked about some of the prophecies given. And one important one was in the names that were given. The names of the children. And in that, Hosea was told to name a child, no compassion. And another one, he was told to name, not a people. Not a people, no compassion. And so this is what's happening. This is a prophecy. You are a people that have now become not a people. And that's where it began to take place. Now, what happened later on, that captivity was a little different. Now, what happened later on, let's see how it... let me come out of this. Maybe I can get the rest of what I'm trying to get. Oh, it's done kicked me out the whole thing. There we go. All right, if we can see down on this end. Oh, let me pull it back up in the slideshow. Maybe I can't make it any bigger right there. All right, here we go. All right, we can see right here around 586, there's something else that happens. Around 586, there's my cursor. Around here, you have Jeremiah who's prophesying. You have Daniel who's prophesying. You have Habakkuk. You have Ezekiel, all speaking to now the southern tribes. And they're speaking to the southern tribes about what's going to happen. And what happened with the northern tribes was they had already been scattered. Already been scattered. You're talking, a couple hundred years difference, 100 and some years difference. But here, they're saying, listen, this same thing is going to happen. Now, we've gone through a lot of the book of Jeremiah throughout our just our regular reading, and we're now in chapter 35. So you see where they were threatening Jeremiah. They were putting him in jail. They hated him. Why did they hate him so much? Because he was speaking the prophecies of what was going to happen. And they were thrown off. And the biggest reason they were thrown off is because it looked to be all good. Everything looked fine. So in their minds, we're all good. Everything is good. We're doing well. Why is he speaking this way? Why is he saying that we're going to go through a captivity? Why is he saying that we are going to be taken over by a people? Ain't happening. And so, who is Jeremiah being led by? The Most High. He's giving him the words to speak. He's telling him what to say and prophesy to this people. But they refuse to hear him. They refuse to hear him. Therein lies a problem. Because by 586, now King Nebuchadnezzar comes in and begins to, piece by piece, take away the power from Israel. Take away the power and the reign from Yehuda. And eventually they end up, everybody, in captivity. They end up in captivity. And so most of the book of Daniel is written in Babylon. Right? And that is the captivity that actually took place. It is Daniel who is writing of the things that took place while they're there. And so, what's so important about this? What's so important about this? This splitting and division is not just spoken of as being the end, but there's more to the story. So now moving forward a little bit, I'm not going to go into too much depth here, but I do want to remind us of this particular reading that we did. So let's go to Jeremiah 25. And this is going to help us historically. Again, we went through a lot of the history leading up to it. But one of the important things was in Jeremiah, there was a time frame given. And so we will look first. Let's see. We did 3 through 12. But I'm not going to go through everything. Okay, so let's look at verse 5. It says, they wouldn't listen, right? And he says, turn back now, everyone, from his evil way and from the evil of your deeds, and dwell on the soil which Yahweh has given you, to you and to your fathers forever and ever. So he's telling them, listen, if we turn back from those deeds, then we can stay right here where the Most High has actually planted us and has blessed us to be. Like, we don't have to be given out. But verse 7 says, but you did not listen to me, declares Yahweh, so as to provoke me with the works of your hands for your own evil. And then verse 9 says, I am sending and taking all the tribes of the north, declares Yahweh, and Nebuchadnezzar, the sovereign of Babel, my servant. He calls the sovereign of Babel his servant, Nebuchadnezzar, and shall bring them against this land and against its inhabitants and against these nations all around, and shall put them under the ban and take them in astonishment and a hissing and everlasting ruins. And I shall banish from them the voice of rejoicing and the voice of gladness, the voice of a bridegroom and the voice of the bride, and the sound of the millstone and the light and the lamp. And so now you have that scripture where they are there on the banks of the Jordan, and they're saying, how can we sing in a strange land? He has taken away the singing. He has taken away and banished them. And verse 12 gives us a time frame, and it says, and it shall be, when 70 years are completed, that I shall punish the sovereign of Babel and that nation, the land of Kasdim, for their crookedness, declares Yahweh, and shall make it everlasting ruins. So then there is now a shift that takes place after 70 years. But they got to go through that 70 years. Now remember, the northern tribe never got a time determination. There was never a time limit placed. And so if we go through now, we can understand and look forward to when the children of Israel from the south will return. So now you look at later in Jeremiah, you look at the book of, we'll go through a little bit of it, Nehemiah. Let's look at what's happening. Because as they return to, as they return to that place of promise, and the time frame elapsed, and now they are granted the opportunity to return to the land that they were promised, there's a rejoicing that takes place. But there's also a divine intervention, I'll call it, because literally the Most High spoke with Nehemiah and the different rulers, Ezra, the ones who stepped up and said, whoa, this time has gone, and now the time for us to return has come. And so you see here it says, the words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, and it came to be in the new moon of Kislev, in the 20th year, as I was in the citadel of Shushan, that Hanani, one of my brothers, came with men from Yehuda, and I asked them concerning the Yehudim who had escaped, who had survived the captivity, and concerning Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is where they were taken from. And it says, and they said to me, the remnant who are left of the captivity in the province are there in great evil and reproach. And the wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are burned with fire. And so this is what Yahweh promised would happen. Your land is going to be left in ruins. This is now at the end of this 70 years. And so now they are actually returning. And let's look at verse 8, Nehemiah 1 and 8. It says, please remember the word that you commanded your servant Moshe, saying, if you trespass, I shall scatter you among the peoples. If you trespass, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you shall turn back to me and guard my commands and do them, though you were cast out to the end of the heavens, what's going to happen? I shall gather them from there and bring them to the place which I have chosen to make my name dwell there. And so here he reminds there is a scattering for disobedience. But what happens when you guard? Verse 9, but if you shall turn back to me and guard my commands and do them, though you were cast out, I sent you everywhere. Though you were cast out. I shall gather them from there. Where's there? Wherever they have been scattered. And remember again, we're talking about north and south. North and south. North and south. So let's now look at Jeremiah 31. Because in the midst of Jeremiah speaking of what's gonna happen in the future with the captivity, he also speaks of what's gonna happen with them coming back together. And so we're gonna start getting into the meat of make us one. Because the thing that separated was what? Disobedience. That's what came in and caused the division. Disobedience. And so in understanding coming back, what is that going to require? Obedience. It's just a very simple formula. He says if you obey, scatter. I mean, if you disobey, scattered. If you obey, gathered. Do you want to be scattered or do you want to be gathered? And so in this, Jeremiah also talks about what's going to happen later on. And so let's look at verse 3, Jeremiah 31 and 3. Jeremiah 31 and 3, and it says, Yahweh appeared to me from afar, saying, I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore I shall draw you with loving commitment. I am going to build you again. Y'all hear that word? Again. I'm going to build you again, and you shall be rebuilt, O maiden of Israel. Again you shall take up your tambourines and go forth in the dancing of those who rejoice. Remember what he said he was going to take away? He said he's going to take away singing. He was going to take away rejoicing. They were going to be in a place where they didn't hear the sounds of the bridegroom and the sounds of the bride and the millstone and all of those things that represent them being in their own land, them being under their own rule, them being under the rulership of the Most High. He says he was taking those away. But here, Yahweh is speaking through Jeremiah and to Jeremiah of what is not just to come with the captivity, but what is to come with the regathering and the rebuilding. So verse 4 again says, I am going to build you again, and you shall be rebuilt, O maiden of Israel. Remember, when we see Israel now, who is Jeremiah at this time speaking to? Because the northern kingdom has been in Assyrian captivity and now spent and sent all over the place. So he is speaking directly to who? The northern kingdom. The southern kingdom. He's speaking directly to the southern kingdom. But when you refer to the southern kingdom, how are they typically referred to as? Judah or Yehudah. And so in understanding that, he says, O maiden of Israel. So he is not simply just speaking to the southern tribes. This is not just simply of just the southern tribe. And we can see more of that. So let's read verse 5. Again, you shall plant vines on the mountains of Shemaron. Shemaron is in the north. Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 5. Shemaron is in the north. The planter shall plant and treat them as common. Verse 6, for there shall be a day when the watchmen cry on the mountain of Ephraim. There it is. Arise and let us go up to Zion, to Yahweh our Elohim. Listen, Zion is in the south. Ephraim is in the north. This is where they said, we're not even coming to your holy days. We're not coming to Jerusalem. Ephraim was supposed to go to the south. That's the place where Yahweh has placed his name. They were supposed to go there for their feast days. This was the Aliyah. They were supposed to go there. That's where they were supposed to go 3 times a year. They knew that. But the division divided them, and the separation turned into disobedience and all of this back and forth that they were fighting. But right here in verse 6, it's talking about Ephraim saying, arise and let us go to Zion. So now there's a regathering. Verse 7 says, for thus said Yahweh, sing with gladness for Jacob and shout among the chief of the nations. Cry out, give praise and say, O Yahweh, save your people, the remnant of Israel, the entire house. He spoke to, we talked about the north in verse 6. Well, in verse 7, in speaking of Jacob, now speaking of the entire. In speaking of Israel, in speaking of the entire. Verse 8 says, see, I am bringing them from the land of the north, and shall gather them from the ends of the earth. Among them the blind and the lame, those with child and those in labor together. A great assembly returning here. Why are they returning? They are returning back to obedience. They are returning back to oneness. Oh, Yah, make us one. Verse 9 says, with weeping they shall come, and with their prayers I bring them. I shall make them walk by rivers and waters in a straight way, in which they do not stumble, for I shall be a father to Israel and Ephraim. He is my firstborn. And so he's saying they're going to be, why are they weeping? They have been weeping by the Jordan, longing to be home. Well, that's to come. This is still being prophesied. So that's what would come, is that they would be standing there with their lyres and being told, sing us some songs of Zion. And they look at the people and say, how can we sing while we're in this strange land? So that weeping was not of joy, but it says he has traded joy, sadness for joy. And that lamentation and that weeping and lamenting for the oil of happiness. And here you have in verse 9, this weeping is a weeping of great joy. It's a weeping of great joy because people are coming back together. And it says in verse 10, hear the word of Yahweh, O nations, and declare it in the isles afar off, and say, he who scattered Israel gathers him, and shall guard him as a shepherd his flock. Shall guard him as a shepherd guards his flock. For Yahweh shall ransom Jacob and redeem him from the hand of the one stronger than he. And they shall come in and shall sing on the height of Zion, and stream to the goodness of Yahweh. For grain and for new wine and for oil and for the young of the flock and the herd, and their being shall be like a well-watered garden, and never languish again. Pause. For him to say never languish again, that helps us to realize that this is a prophetic statement from that point and from our current point. Is there any current languish? Are we still trying to sing in a strange land? So this is a word still yet to come. Some people might say, well, it's all good. That all went away when they came back from Babylonian captivity. No, because when they came back from Babylonian captivity, yes, the Zerubbabel's temple was built, and they were there. They had a sword in one hand, hammer in the other, and they worked on those walls. And we read in Nehemiah where it says that the ones that stayed behind said it was in ruins. It was destroyed. And so everything had to be remade. They had to be retaught. They had to relearn Torah. They had to relearn the sacrificial system. They had to relearn everything, the feast days, the holy days, how to do everything again. You had to learn all of that. But somewhere along the line, there is still a regathering that has not yet to happen. Because this says that when this regathering that is spoken of in Jeremiah 31 happens, they will never languish again. Never again. And so let's look down. We're going to skip down just a little bit. And I want to set up right here at verse 21. And it says, set up signposts, make landmarks, set your heart toward the highway, the way in which you went. Turn back, O maiden of Israel. Turn back to these cities of yours. Till then, would you turn here and there, O backsliding daughter? For Yahweh has created what is new on earth. A woman encompasses a man. There said Yahweh of hosts, the Elohim of Israel, let them once again say this word in the land of Yehuda and in its cities, when I turn back their captivity. Yahweh bless you, O home of righteousness, mountain of set apartness. And in Yehuda and all the cities, farmers and those who journey with their flocks shall dwell together. For I shall fill the weary being, and I shall replenish every grieved being. At this I awoke and looked around, and my sleep was sweet to me. So remember, he is going through some stuff and seeing all of these prophecies of the downfall. He's seeing his people go into captivity. He's already seen what happened with the southern tribes. He knows of that history. I meant the northern tribes. He knows of that history. They all know of that history. And so there is something now happening. And so we skip down to verse 31, and it says, see, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when I shall make a renewed covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Yehuda. You see that? Bringing back together. And it says, not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day when I strengthened their hand to bring them out of the land of Mitzrayim, my covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them, declares Yahweh. For this is the covenant I shall make with the house of Israel after those days. Now notice, before he said Israel and Yehuda, speaking of the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. But when he comes right here, he only says Israel. Remember, also, sometimes when Israel is used only, it can be speaking of the entire house, all of it. And I do believe that's what's happening here. And he says, I shall put my Torah in their inward parts and write it on their hearts. And I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. Now what's happening is that, remember, there was the disobedience that drove apart and separated. He doesn't even use a separate calling. He doesn't even address them separately anymore right here. He addressed them as one. So in our prayer, y'all make us one to be called Israel, to be called his people, for him to be our Elohim. And it says, even in that, no longer shall they teach each one their neighbor and each one his brother, saying, Know Yah, for they shall all know me. From the least of them to the greatest of them declares Yah, for I shall forgive their crookedness and remember their sins no more. I shall forgive their crookedness and remember their sins no more. And he made this promise so solid. He says, you know, the sun would have to stop shining. I'm going to bring this word to pass. He says, I'll break that covenant with David if I break my covenant with day and night. Meaning that he will bring that to pass. Now, here's the thing. He'll do it with you or he'll do it without you. Because that part's up to us. Whether we are a part of that covenant that he makes available. He's going to make it available. It's there. It's there for us. It's there for us to accept. Let's look now at Ezekiel. And we're going to look at Ezekiel chapter 37. And hopefully this gives you a different appreciation for this valley of dry bones. So, not going to go through every single verse. Not going to go through every single verse. But understand, some of it I'll summarize as we go. So, Yahweh is showing Ezekiel a valley filled with dead man's bones. And in that, it says that they are very dry. So they are all the way dead. There's nothing there. They are dead. They are completely dead. In verse 3, he asks him a question. He says, can these bones live? Would these bones live? And Ezekiel responded by saying, oh, Master Yah, you know. And then Yahweh gives a prophecy to Ezekiel by telling him to speak. And he says, prophesy to these bones. And you shall say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of Yah. The thing for them to live was to do what? Hear the word of Yah. That was the beginning of the process. He didn't say go grab the bones and start putting all of them together and, okay, you know, that's a head, so make sure you got that at the top, and then that's the shoulders, and put that. No, the first thing for these bones to live is to hear the word of Yah. Step 1. Verse 5 says, thus said the Master Yahweh to these bones, see, I am bringing into you a spirit, and you shall live. And I shall put sinews on you and bring flesh upon you, and cover you with skin, and put a spirit in you, and you shall live, and you shall know that I'm Yah. And so the first thing they were told to do was hear his word. And so, of course, Ezekiel carried out and said what he was supposed to say, and he says there was a rattling, and the bones started coming together. And he saw that the sinew and the flesh and all of that started coming. But there was no spirit in them. And he said, prophesy to the spirit. Prophesy, son of man. And you shall say to the spirit, thus said the Master Yah, come from the four winds, O spirit, and breath on and breathe on these killed ones so that they live. And he did it. And then it says they stood upon their feet, a great army. And he said to me, son of man, these bones are all the house of Israel. Did he say, oh, this is the house of Judah, and then this is the house of Israel, or this is the house of Ephraim, and this is... No, he said this is all the house of Israel. See, they say, our bones are dry, our expectancy has perished, and we ourselves have been cut off. That is what's been spoken. You've been scattered. You have been sent everywhere. You don't even know who you are no more. Have no clue of who you are. You're held up in every church house and every this house and every mosque and everything all over the place. You are searching for what's missing. That's all it is. Why? Because you've been cut off. Verse 11 says you've been cut off. Therefore, verse 12, therefore prophesy, and you shall say to them, thus said the Master Yahweh, see, O my people, I am opening your burial sites. Y'all, we only think of burial sites as in the ground or in a mausoleum somewhere, but some of these burial sites is very much alive and well, and these burial sites is in these church houses, and these burial sites are in our home houses, in our bedrooms, and all kinds of places where you find dead man's bones. And what is he saying? I'm going to call you out from wherever that is, and I shall bring you into the land of Israel. And you shall know that I am Yahweh when I open your burial sites, my people, and bring you up from your burial sites. And I shall put my spirit in you, and you shall live. And I shall settle you in your own land, and you shall know that I, Yahweh, have spoken, and I have done it. So this is the regathering. This is one house. Now let's look at how this thing plays out. And he comes to him again and he says, O son of man, take a stick for yourself and write on it for Yehuda and the children of Israel, his companions. So that's Yehuda, right? Then he says, take another stick and write on it for Yosef. Now, who was Joseph's sons? Ephraim and Manasseh. What was the northern kingdom very often referred to as? Ephraim. Right. So here you have Yehuda and Ephraim, the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. And it says, and for all the house of Israel, his companions. So part of Israel that's called Ephraim, part of Israel that is called Yehuda. Now what do you do in verse 17? Bring them together for yourself into one stick, and they shall become one in your hand. And when the children of your people speak to you, saying, won't you show us what you mean by these? Say to them, thus say the Master Yahweh, see, I am taking the stick of Yosef, which is in the hand of Ephraim. So that's the northern tribes, and the tribes of Israel and his companions. And I shall give them unto him with the stick of Yehuda, southern tribes, and make them one stick, and they shall be one in my hand. They shall be one in my hand. This is the great army that stood as Israel. But it required what was spoken of back in Jeremiah. Remember what he said? He said, oh yeah, you were disobedient and I scattered you. But your obedience, because of your obedience. But what was the first step to life coming back to these bones? Hearing the word of Yah. That's what it took. Hearing the word of Yah. Step one. Before a bone rattled. He says, speak first by declaring to them, hear the word of Yah. And that is the way by which they will become one. Let's read verse 22. Nope. I stopped at 21. Sorry. Verse 21. And speak to them. Thus said the Master Yahweh, see, I am taking the children of Israel from among the nations, wherever they have gone, and shall gather them from all around, and I shall bring them into their land, and I shall make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Israel. And one sovereign shall be sovereign over them all, and let them no longer be two nations, and let them no longer be divided into two reigns. And they shall no longer defile themselves with their idols, nor with their disgusting matters, for with any of their transgressions. And I shall save them from all their dwelling places in which they have sinned, and I shall cleanse them, and they shall be my people, and I shall be their Elohim. Remember the prophecy that was spoken in Hosea. Lo ami, not a people. Not a people. But these that were called not a people, by the time you read in the Brit Hadashah, what do we read in, I believe it's 2 Peter. And it says, you were once not a people. Once not a people. That's exactly what that's referring to. You were once not a people, but now you have been called the sons of the living Elohim. The sons of the living Elohim. And verse 24 says, while David, my servant, is sovereign over them, and they shall all have one shepherd, and walk in my right rulings, and guard my laws. What's next? And shall do them. And shall do them. So this is that oneness. This is that oneness that's spoken of. And now let's go to John. This is where we'll end. Chapter 15. And it says, I'll start at verse 3. You are already clean because of what? The word. Because of the word which I have spoken to you. Stay in me, and I stay in you, as the branch is unable to bear fruit of itself, unless it stays in the vine. So neither you, unless you stay in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who stays in me, and I in him, he bears much fruit. Because without me, you are unable to do naught. Remember those bones? They stood, and without the Spirit of the Most High, they had flesh, they had blood, they had bones connected. They were standing as an army, but they were still without the Spirit. And without the Spirit of the Most High, they could do naught but stand there. That's all they could do. Verse 6 says, and if anyone does not stay in me, he is thrown away as a branch and dries up. And they gather him and throw them into the fire, and they are burned. However, verse 7 says, if you stay in me and my words stay in you, you shall ask whatever you wish, and it shall be done for you. And then we look at chapter 17. Going forward just a couple chapters. And start at verse 17. 17 and 17. And it says, set them apart in your truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I also sent them into the world. And for them I set myself apart so that they too might be set apart in truth. And I do not pray for these alone, but also for those believing in me through their word. It's important. That is important. So that they all might be one, as you, Father, are in me and I in you, so that they too might be one in us, so that the world might believe that you have sent me. And the esteem which you gave me I have given to them, so that they might be one. So that they might be one. I in them and you in me, so that they might be perfected into one. So that the world knows that you have sent me, and I have loved them as you have loved me. This oneness, make us one. And so then understanding, when it says back there, where it says believing, I not only pray for these, but also those believing in me through their word, which means they have witnessed and testified of me. Now we go back to something that we talked about, which was Jezreel. Y'all remember that? Or Yesreel. And remember, in that word meant Yah sows. What is the reason anyone sows? To receive a harvest. Why in the world are we convinced that we can circumvent the Most High's harvest by declaring, I'm it and me alone? Doesn't make sense. I'm not going to share because, you're not the right hue. Or I'm not going to, you this. Or, you doing that. Or, you not this. Or you, wait a minute. What we have been called to do is to be a light that others see. And what did the Messiah say? When he sowed, there is a reaping that takes place. So what did the Messiah say? Who is his mother? Who is his brother? Those doing the will of the Father. So you mean to tell me, it can only come from blood? No. It's wrong on both parts. We got too many of our brothers in this Hebrew walk trying to say who can't be, who can't belong, who can't come on this journey, who can't be one of Yah's elect. And y'all, the same thing is happening on the other side. So we just doing what they do? So then you go in the synagogue and they like, you're just a good little goy. You're just a good little nation that want to do the commands. That's nice. So just, these are the things that you can do. So we doing the same thing. They doing it. Then we turn around and do it. And meanwhile, Yeshua is saying, my mother, my brother, my sister, the one doing the will of the Father, period. Because that is what makes you. He's sown. That's the reason I'm going back there. He has sown with the intent of receiving a harvest. The only way you receive a harvest is if you allow others to come with you. Now you come with me. Remember that mixed multitude that came out of Mitzrayim? That mixed multitude was mixed because some of those people who were not blood-born of Israel saw and heard that word, and they declared, your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. And where you go, I go. And once that declaration is made, this adoption that the Most High does is set. And you whether you're native born or whether you are adopted. So y'all, everybody trying to figure out who we, well, we the people, well, what? Listen, are you doing the will of the Father? Have you heard the word? Are we obeying that word? That, because I just sat here and spent 4 teachings showing the scattering that took place. So there ain't no telling, especially when you're talking about that northern tribe, it is no telling where in the world they at. Everywhere. If we only talking blood. But cannot your circumcision be counted as uncircumcision if you do not do what is right according to the Torah? And so if we really want to be one, what we need to be concentrating on is what is the Most High instructing us to do. Everything else will come. What is he instructing us to do? And if you have that same desire, you're my brother. You're my sister. Let's walk. So y'all make us one. Hallelujah. Praise Yah.